In the previous episode, we covered the count functions, the sum functions, and the average functions. In this episode, I'll be introducing an easier and faster approach of how you can conduct the same calculations using pivot tables. Let's get started. Pivot tables are a good way of summarizing data in Excel. We'll be conducting the same calculations that we've been doing in the previous episodes. So if you haven't watched any of the previous episodes, now would be the best time to pause this video and familiarize yourself so that you're not lost. I'll also include the links in the description below. Before we get started with our calculations, let me just demonstrate how to firstly create a pivot table. So we'll still be using the same data that we've been using in other episodes, which is this one. So in order to create a pivot table, you go to Insert, and as you can see here, there is a pivot table here. You could just click on that. Then you need to select the table or range. That is the range that you want to select. You could highlight that and then highlight your range, and then from there it's either you choose where to place the pivot table. It's either you choose a new worksheet or an existing one. An existing one would be maybe this one or another sheet that you had already created, but for now we'll choose a new worksheet. And then when you say okay, it will create the section here. As you can see, it says pivot table 1. To build a report, choose from fields from the pivot table and the field list. So this is the field list, and this gives you a list of all the fields that are within your data. As you can see, we have the unique ID, the name, the sex, the sector, regions. And this is how you would create your pivot table. It has options of filtering, columns, rows, and then values. Let's go back again. So that method that I just showed, it highlights only this data. However, it doesn't take into consideration, for instance, if you have an additional entry here, it wouldn't read that because you would have just chosen only what you have now. Another method that would help you in order for your pivot table to choose even the new rows that will be added. For instance, if maybe this was an ongoing survey or registration that you've opened for a while, and you anticipate that there'll be more people registering, then it will be easy because then the pivot table would update. So this method is, you go to here on the corner here, there's an arrow there, you click here, and after clicking that, then you still follow the same method that you did. Go to Insert, then pivot table, and as you can see, it already highlights your data for you. But instead of ending here in row 52, it just highlights everything. So it allows for the pivot table to pick up new entries here on row 54 and others that will be filled up. And you could say, okay, either you put this in a new worksheet, that was the example in the beginning, or an existing one. Let's just make an example of how an existing one would look like. So down here it gives you the table range. That is where you're going to put your new pivot table. So we'll use the sheet that was created before. You'll go to that sheet, And as you can see, it already like tells you, okay, sheet 1, and then you could choose to put your table either anywhere here, not where you've put the previous one. You could just put it, let's put it underneath, and then it will show which cell you're actually like putting your pivot table in, and then say okay, and so it will create the second pivot table for you, and which is still the same as the previous one. It has like your pivot table fields and everything related to that. So yes, that's just how you could create the pivot table. So in the next example, we'll be covering the calculations that we made in the previous episodes. In the introduction to count functions episode, we calculated the session registrations, the registrations by gender, and the male registrations across regions. We saw that we have 51 registrations, and there were more males than females who had registered for the sessions. There were 29 males and there were 22 females. And across regions, we know that we have 7 males that were in North America, 8 that were from South America, 1 that was from Europe, and then 13 that were from Africa. So in this episode, we'll be calculating the same attributes using pivot tables now to see if we'll get the same results. Firstly, we'll be calculating the registration session registrations, and then you'll just click here and your pivot table field list will appear. There are instances where when you click that the pivot table field does not appear. So let me just show you an example. So you could click here, and as you can see, nothing happens. So in instances like that, you would go to pivot table analyze, and here there is an icon here. It says field list. You click on that, and then it will appear. So because we are trying to calculate session registrations, if you remember from the previous episodes, we were using the unique ID to try to find out like how many people had registered for the session. You could, here in your field names, you could just click on unique ID, and automatically what happens is Excel, it chooses where to put your field. So it chose it to put it here under values. This is because if you remember, the ID is actually it's numbers here. So then as Excel just assumes that you are trying to sum it up. So as you can see, it's giving us like a weird number here because this is numbers. Then Excel is thinking that you want to sum up the numbers. So how you could change that is you could right click on this, the sum of unique ID, right click on that, and then this page will appear. You'll go to field settings, and this has like the different functions you could summarize your data by. And just remember, we are trying to figure out like how many people have registered for the session. So that is a count function. You just click on the count here and just say okay. So it is 51. Let's just see if using what will happen if we use the name. So you still follow the same example of just choosing that. So as you can see, this is what it just does for you. And to use the pivot table, I think it's easier to use it in order to understand it and understand. That's why we went back into trying to understand the different functions, because if you use pivot tables without understanding, you might end up seeing weird things here that you don't know what to do with it. However, now that we know what we are trying to do and what we are trying to achieve, it's easier for us to then use the pivot table. So just unclick that. Because we want like the count, we will take this the field name, which is name. You hold it and then you drag it under values here. So as you can see, because this is these are names, these are text, Excel then thinks, okay, you want the count, and it calculates the count for you here. So we don't necessarily need to do the change that we made when we're using the unique ID. Second example would be the registration by gender. So let's click on an empty cell here, registration by gender. So instead of repeating the same method of highlighting your last data, you could just highlight your pivot table here and make sure that you've highlighted everything. You copy and then you could just place it. So make sure you're placing it on a cell that is empty. So you're gonna just place it here. So this will be it's as you can see, it will still give us the same thing. And then from here, what you can just do is we are trying to delete the name. We don't need it now. So remember, what we are trying to do now is we want to see the registration by the sex. So we have our unique ID here, which shows that we have 51 registrations. So now we want it to disaggregate that by gender, which is either males and females. So you will hold again like we were doing, and then drag that under your rows, and it will give you the disaggregation now by, okay, we have females 22, females, and 29 males. Another example that we have was males, registration of males across regions. So let's just type that out. And similar to what we were doing, you'll just copy that just to save time and paste it underneath here. So we no longer need the sex here. So we are looking for the regions. So now we are taking the regions and dragging them under rows. However, as you can see, this gives us a very different number than we had previously. This is because this is everyone, including the females. But for this example, we are just trying to find out how many males have actually registered across the different regions. So now we'll go to the sex field, and we're going to filter by that. So what we'll do is you still go to sex here and filter and put it under filter. So here it allows us to now filter. So as you can see, it will say all because it's everyone. When you click on this, then you could just filter now by males to only just show males, and the number here then changes because it then goes back to 29. And as you can see in our map, if you remember the map that we were showing before, it had Asia as 0. So within the pivot table you won't see Asia because there's nothing on, like, males were not there in Asia. So yes, this is how you can actually come up with the count functions to calculate this using pivot tables. So the next part will be calculating the income generated through registrations and the revenue per sector, which in episode 3 we calculated using the sum functions. So now we'll be using the pivot tables to try and see if we can get the same values. So here we'll still be using the same example. So you just highlight, let me choose this one. So you just highlight the pivot table that you've created previously, paste it there just to save time, and then you can just delete those. And so because we are looking at the income generated through registrations, we'll just pick the registration fee, and automatically it chooses the sum of registration, which is exactly what we are looking for. However, it hasn't formatted our registration fee into currencies like we have in this sheet. So we'll just change that. So you go to values here and right click on that, and then go down to the field settings, and then on your field settings you have an option here for number. So this is where you will be changing the formatting. You click on number, and then there are different formatting options here, but because we want to change this into currency, you go to currency, and it will give you like a symbol that you want to use depending on the country that you are in, and then you could choose that. And I'm using the rand, and then here you could choose like decimal places. So I'll just keep it to 0 decimal places, and then after that I'll just choose OK, and then OK again. So as you can see, it gives us 440,700, and that is what we had previously calculated using the sum function. And then I think another attribute that we are calculating will be the registrations per sector, the income generated through sectors, that is so we'll just copy that and then paste it here, so you don't have to repeat the same thing again. Because we are using the registration, we'll keep the registration here, but only choose like the sector, because we're trying to disaggregate it by sector. So you then click on it and then drag it down into the rows. This are a list of your sectors and the registration fee and the money and income generated by that. And in order for you to kind of like maybe sort it, I think it looks a bit messy here, because then you can't really, I think the eye doesn't really see which one is larger and which one is smaller. So you can just highlight your values there, and then come here and you can sort from largest to smallest. That will change. So then here we can actually see that the health sector has actually brought a lot of revenue, and then the least one is the ECD sector. So this is actually the same as what we had previously calculated using the sum functions, but it's quicker and easier to do than when we were filling out the the calculations one by one. So in episode 4, we calculated the average registration fee using the average function, and if you remember, there were different approaches that we tried there, which required us to firstly do the count function and the sum function. However, using pivot tables is actually like quicker, and so let's just show an example of that. We're still continuing to copy and paste our pivot tables. You copy, then you paste here, and let's just show our pivot list. And then you come down to the values and then right click on the field list, field settings. So here what we're going to do is we're gonna change the sum to average, and then just say okay. If you remember, when we were first starting to calculate the registration fee, we had to now try and change the currency. However, because we copied and pasted this, it comes with the same currency. So here it's already calculated the average registration fee, which is quicker than the previous method that we had used. So next I'm going to be showing you how to update the pivot tables. So let's just make an example. So here we have two files. I'll be making two examples. We have here this data. So you remember previously I was mentioning that sometimes, depending on the method that you use to create a pivot table, sometimes it will just highlight only the data that you have, and that has a limitation for when you want to update your pivot table. So we have this data here, and in our previous examples we were creating this pivot table. So now I've made a copy of that data. Is still the same data, and I've just made some few examples here of the pivot table. So let me just show you how you could update your pivot table. So let's assume maybe you have new entries, new registrations. Let's take this, let's copy those. You'll copy them here, and then I'll put them just underneath here. So that would be we've added 3 more. In the beginning we had 51 registrations, so now we've added 3, so our total should be 54. So nothing has happened as yet. So when you want to update your pivot table, you would go to data here, and then you refresh, and as you can see, the numbers have updated. And that's another useful thing of creating pivot tables, because it allows for you to easily update your data summaries rather than calculating the same calculations again. So I'll just also make an example of what happens when maybe your pivot table only is only highlighting the data that you have, and how you could fix that. So I'll repeat the same method. Just take this and just copy this, and then paste here. So we would refresh. However, as you can see, like nothing has happened, and it hasn't been updated even though we refreshed that. We could try again, but nothing is happening. So in this instance where you know that you have additional rows, additional entries in your data, but you can't see updates on your pivot table, the best way you could do is you want to see what data your pivot table is highlighted. So you could just click on your pivot table and then go to pivot table analyze. Here you would have to go to the change data source. It will show you where your data source is, and then when you click on that, then it goes and highlights the data. So as you can see, it will only show the data that you've highlighted. So remember, when we were doing this first example, we only highlighted the rows that we had. So now it's not reading the new rows that we have been added, the new registrations, which is now a limitation. In order to change this, you will change your location. So that means then updating that, and then highlighting it again in order for it to read the new entries. This is still not the best method, because then I feel like you still need to work hard again. However, it will update. So it has updated, as you can see with the fields here. It will update, and then so then it means that if you look at this, then you'd have to repeat the same thing for this, the same thing for here again, which I feel like it's just a long and tedious process. So just to be aware that if you are creating a pivot table, maybe choose that method where you're highlighting all your data in order for it to ensure that you are able to update as quickly as you could. Remember, you just come to the corner here where there is I think it's a triangle or an arrow. You highlight that, then in this way, when you go to insert, when you go to pivot table, you could actually see that it's highlighting it's highlighting all the columns. So it allows for any updates that are being made within your data to show up as you refresh your pivot tables. And yes, that's it for today's episode. In the next episode, we'll be discussing how to create graphs in Excel. We'll also touch on what types of graphs you can choose for what type of data.